Alright, so I kind of want to talk about the World of Warcraft talent system and like all the different changes that have happened to it. For me, talent trees really seem to be one of like a really big change that still kind of, I don't know, I guess resonates with me today because it's something that is such a drastic change from what I remember for the majority of the game. And something like a lot of people who do remember the old talent trees, I really enjoyed them. I enjoyed just the way they worked. And I think there was a lot of benefits to it on the player side. I think there's definitely a cathartic nature to that every level you get to do something kind of aspect. Because right now, I'm tentatively on and off, trying to give WoW a chance again. I decided to try a Demon Hunter, class I didn't play. I played it when they first came out, and I thought it was interesting, but I didn't like it more than I liked my other classes. So I really didn't touch him for the entirety of Legion. I'd be one of the few people who never leveled a Demon Hunter during Legion. I did the pre-patch event, and that was it. So now I've gone back, and I'm like, well, this is completely new, something I've never done. So it's fresh in that aspect, which is, it's good because I find that engaging, and I think that's important. It's kind of teaching me some lessons about kind of making things a little bit different, especially when you're dealing with a massive game world that is overall the same. Again, it goes back to this concept of discovery, where I'm discovering how the class plays, the different interactions of the abilities, discovering what's the best way to do things, discovering how to set up my weak auras. Again, I'm a big weak auras fan, and I actually get a big kick out of setting up a really nice weak auras suite, I guess. I go all out. Every ability that has a cooldown, for the most part, I have a weak aura for. But I don't like making it just like a series of icons with timers on them. I like to make it very, very graphical and bars, and use lots of icons and symbols and animations. Like, I get really into it, and I enjoy doing that. I'll respec classes when I'm bored just to learn how they play and then build a weak aura for it. I've, given a few of them out to people that I know, and people that I know usually really enjoy using them. And they're not very complicated. I know I've seen some weak auras that use, that have like some code built into them that will help you decide which ability to use next, that's a little too much. I think it should be, I just like it because it makes it easier to keep track of what has to be used when and what can be used when. Anyways, enough fanboying over weak auras, which I do recommend. Get the add-on, it's very good. So the point of that is that I'm leveling a Demon Hunter, and Demon Hunters are unique because from 1 to 110, they actually do have talents because they start at level 100 or level 98. And I apologize for all the snorting. It's ridiculously cold here and very dry. But they actually have talents from 100 to 110. Every 2 levels, I think. But even that, it's knowing that every 2 levels I'm getting something. I guess maybe because it is every 2 levels and I know it's coming, it makes the wait worse. Because you ding 105, 103, and you're just like, nothing changed. There's nothing to do. There's nothing to look forward to when you ding a level, except to then ding the next level. And when you're talking that it is a few hours of gameplay in between each level, it makes the wait even worse. And again, this is something I do remember disliking, but I think now that I'm being more critical of the game as I play through it, I'm not playing it, I'm critiquing it, I find it even more frustrating. That's because I guess it's because at this point the actual interaction with the game world is old hat. It's something I've done to death. I've done all these quests, a dozen times. I've seen all these places a dozen times. And really the class is what's different. But then the class, knowing that I have things to go, things to unlock, but not being able to. And I guess maybe it feels a little bit more pertinent as a demon hunter because you kind of see that you have abilities that would be useful that you don't have access to. But I also think it's just, again, there's kind of that nice kind of Pavlovian reward system where ding a level, get a cookie. And I think that's what a lot of people really enjoyed about the old talent tree. It's what a lot of people enjoyed about the artifacts in Legion. Even after we knew, you'll unlock everything. There was still something cathartic about just occasionally, oh, I got some more power. Let me pop back to my base and then do the thing. It was nice because what it was is you could see yourself kind of slowly creeping towards something great. Again, the artifacts had those big, they had the more impactful nodes on them that actually really modified spells quite heavily and could change your entire rotation in some cases. Classic, well, I guess I wish you could call them the old talent trees also had that where there was kind of certain levels kind of based around where the talent trees are now, kind of 15, 30, 45, 60, where it wasn't a 5 caps just increase stat by 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 kind of talent. It was choose between one of these big things, and it was again impactful. But I think it was that kind of steady progression towards that goal that really made it feel like you were doing something. And I think it's a concept that Asmongold's talked about, that other people have talked about, which is fulfillment. Because you feel, like you're doing something and you're moving towards a goal. And the talent system, those old talent trees, was kind of a visual representation. Now, and I get when they removed them, I remember the basic reasoning when they changed to these new kind of just tiered talent systems. One of the biggest reasons that they cited was that, well, there's certain talents everybody takes. The ones, I forget, I know there was one for warriors that, it was early on in one of the trees, and every spec took it, regardless. Because it was increased crit by 1, 2, 3, 4, 5%. And it's just, a 5% increase to crit is, pretty fucking good. So it was just always kind of taken. And they're like, well, if everybody's going to take it, let's just make it into the class and call it done. And I guess on paper, that seems like a good idea. From an administrative point of view, that seems like a good idea. But what it's done is it's removed some of the freedom because somebody may go, I don't want to take 5% credit. Maybe I want to take, I want to put those 5 points in 5% increased masturbation speed because, I want to be different. And I think it's that ability to be different that made people feel engaged. Now, granted, the same person might go, nah, I'm joking, I'm going to take the credit, it's way better. But the fact that they knew they had the choice, and it made them feel as if they did the right thing, because they looked and go, this talent row, I can either put 5 points in masturbation or 5 points in crit. Well, I'm going to take crit because that's a good idea, and I'm a smart player for doing that. So now you feel like you've done something good. So the idea of fulfillment is there. Now, talents are few and far between. I think there's 6 tiers, 7 tiers? I can't remember. 15, 30, 45, 60, 90, and 100, I think. That's 7. But so they're every 15-ish levels. And what it's done is, it's just something that I feel like you unlock once you get there. And they are impactful, a lot of times it's an entirely new ability. It's something you didn't have before. But I think the wait, because you've kind of been staring at it, waiting for a cue to pop or on a flight path or this and that, you might hit the end key and you'll kind of stare at it and okay, maybe there's some kind of theory craft how you're going to do your talent points. But because there's so few options, it's the next level, 1, 2, or 3, and usually one of them sucks, so it's really 2 or 3. You've already kind of come to terms with what you're going to get, where with the older talent trees, you may kind of look through the tree and kind of go, oh yeah, this with that, but it's still, because it's every level, you're kind of like, I'm going to go here, and then I'm going to go here, and then here, and then, so it's kind of, it turns into a much smaller progression, but I think that makes the kind of path forward more enjoyable. Because I think it's one of those things where you're having to wait so long in between talent points, and then when you finally get the talent point and you use it, and it's not the moon and the stars, you feel it's a little bit of a letdown. Because like I've been waiting for so long to get this damn talent, to get this down talent row, and it didn't really do it. It's not as impactful. Sometimes it is. Sometimes it's I guess is Bladestorm still a talent? I don't even know. But maybe it's getting something like Bladestorm or for a warrior, where that's pretty impactful. Bladestorm's a 1 minute fuck you button, and that's great. Everybody loves Bladestorm, right? But a lot of times it's not. A lot of times it's it's just kind of like okay, it's okay. It makes things better, but it's not it's not this huge increase. So I think that kind of the lack of impact combined with the amount of time that you have to wait, yeah, it makes the talent trees feel a little flat. It's kind of just like something, okay, I'm going to do this. I think it's actually, and I think, and one of the big things that I think worked backwards from their intention was that they say, well, everybody's taking the same talents in the old talent trees, so let's make the talent trees more impactful. Or, let's get rid of the fluff and then make the talent trees overall more impactful. But I think what's happened is I feel cookie cutter builds are even more prevalent now, because there's really only a couple of different builds. Where before there was, it's still not as much variety as I think a lot of people want to remember there being. But there was a little bit more room for interpretation and kind of personal flair. And I do think some of this is important, because there could be things where, again, it's the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5% crit. That could be something that you replace with gear. So as you gear up, all of a sudden your crit gets real high, and you're like, you know what, that's 5% crit, while useful in doing something, isn't as necessary as it was before. And so I don't even remember what the other talent is on that row, but maybe it's something like movement speed. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5% movement speed. Something much less impactful, especially in kind of the terms of what matters in combat and damage output. But still has an effect, because I find myself I'm really slow. Getting from point A to point B is just not quite cutting it. I want to be able to run into distance so I can get a charge distance and get back into the fight, right? So now, but my crit's gotten really high because of my gear, so I feel like I that 5% crit, I can afford that 5% movement speed. And it allows you that option. And it's a very minor change, it's not choosing something else over Bladestorm, right? It's a minor change, but it made you feel as if you're owning that class, you're owning that build. This is how I played my class. And I remember, I think I've mentioned the story before, when I was playing my Warlock during Burning Crusade, and kind of discovering both the Souling Siphon Life build, and realizing that I was then a god if I had enough targets to attack. And then also discovering the Demonology, Destruction, Succubus Shadow Bowl build. I don't think that ever really got a nice, clean name. It wasn't as popular. I think it was a little more gear dependent, but I remember at one point it was the highest damage. My damage output was noticeably higher, and all I did was spam Shadow Bolt. That was it. I remember actually I ended up not using it because the damage output would get too high and the tanks would lose threat back when threat was a thing. Because I would get 2 or 3 crits in a row, and it was just fucking game on. It hit so hard that they would have to blow cooldowns. I was having to use Shatter Soul, and then I would have to stop DPS ostensibly, and it ended up being a net loss. And it was boring. It was incredibly boring. So I chose to go back to my regular Affliction build. But it was fun because you would just kind of I discovered these, organically. I didn't find a guide on them. Nobody told me about it. I was just kind of standing at the talent tree going, I bet I could probably do this and this. And sure enough, it worked. And whether or not those interactions were intentional, or if it was just, circumstantial, where they just happened to be right at the right levels for these things to work, which I kind of like things like the Soul Link Siphon Life build. You kind of get the impression it wasn't really meant to be, because it was so just disgustingly strong, but in a very niche way. So I think I do kind of get the impression that it was more of a just kind of a coincidental interaction, because they put these certain talents at these certain points based off their magnitude. Again, they still put the big talents at like 15, 30, 60. And that's just kind of how the cookie crumbled. But it was great because it provided for that discovery. And I think that kind of personal discovery within the class is maybe even more important nowadays, because the wealth of information out there is so high that it's, they're really, it's hard to discover things on your own. You're going to either, if you read any kind of WoW website and kind of, whether it's Icy Veins or Noxic or, people are going to talk shit about those websites, but, I find the builds usually not to my favorite, but one of the things I always liked about Icy Veins was kind of their little explanation of why they did things. And sometimes the explanation of why would actually make me come to my own conclusions, but it made me kind of realize how things interacted. But when you have that wealth of information out there, and it's very, there is a lot of it nowadays, it's harder, I think, to make discoveries. And now there's basically nothing to discover, because there's not really a lot of interactions within the talents and the abilities anymore. And it removes what I consider, one of the most cathartic aspects of the game, which was kind of blazing your own path to become great. One of the things I talked about recently was about how it kind of feels like we're all doing the same thing. Like, what are you doing? I'm running dungeons. Not this dungeon for this gear, that dungeon for that gear. I'm running dungeons because I'm just kind of hoping that a high piece of eye level falls out, and that's it. And so, and what are you doing? I'm running raids, doing LFR. I'm, doing. It's the tasks you engage in are now much more broad and much more generic. And it does kind of feel like everybody's doing the same thing. You don't have this sense of uniqueness where, I'm running Utgard Pinnacle for the Red Sword of Courage, or I'm running, Dungeon XYZ for piece of gear ABC. And everybody kind of had their own goals, because then what would happen was, I'll help you run XYZ if you help me run ABC. And then, that again, it helped build these kind of natural social interactions, because now it's just running dungeons. And you can just run dungeons with just a group of people. There doesn't have to be the interaction. Nobody has to go, I'll help you if you help me, because it's basically beneficial for all of you to just run dungeons, so you don't have to talk about it. And I think this is where a lot of the social interaction is kind of broken down. And I think the same could kind of be said about the talent trees and kind of theory crafting and class design, because now you could say, somebody might inspect your talents back then and go, hey, why did you choose talents, 1, 2, 3? I remember I did. I would be in a group, my raid would bring in another warlock because we were missing a DPS, and he would be doing pretty well, like his, damage output was higher, or more stable, or this and that. I'd pop open his talent tree, and I would go, hey, why did you take his talents, ABC? And then him and I would have a conversation about it, because now there was, there could be a fairly large amount of difference between his talents and mine. Now, again, that's not so, because there's only 3 talents per row, and one of them sucks. Usually. That's just kind of a given. I think a lot of people just expect it. That in and of itself is a whole different problem. That one talent is always just kind of bad. I think a lot of the talents feel a little uninspired as well. Again, this is less of kind of a general discussion and more kind of pinpoint critiquing. I guess we could talk about that. So, and the problem is, it's something that's hard to discuss without specifics. And I don't have, talent trees over in front of me because I'm driving. And I think it's also one of those things that the answer is everything. It's, you could come up with a million different things that could be in the bad talent spot, or how talent should be run, or this or that. I think one of the big things that I think the talent trees lack that I really think they should have is they don't add flavor. They add utility, they add ability, but I feel very much so that talents don't really add flavor to the character. And it seems the new talent system would be very, well set up for that. And I think some of them do. A good example right now is the way Affliction Warlocks, their first tier talents, that I can't talk about because I was just looking at them the other day, it's either I think it's Nightfall, which just randomly procs a free instant Shadow Bolt. I forget, it's like, the Death Bolt or something to that, where it's a moderate cooldown attack that does damage based off of how many dots you have on the target. And then Drain Soul, which then replaces Shadow Bolt, not Siphon Life, or no, not Drain Life, like it used to, and functions the same way, where it was a channel damage over time kind of deal. And it had an execute effect where it did more damage to weaker targets. Those are, I think, a really good example of a row of talents because it dramatically changes kind of the way your character feels and looks to play. You can tell which talent row a Warlock has taken, from the other side, from the second person. You can watch a Warlock and go, oh, he took this one and that one. Because you see he's using Drain Life, or he's, popping Shadow Bolts randomly, and every once in a while you're seeing this big attack go out. It really and it adds flavor. And I think that's important, and it's a good example of how to do it rather than, because sometimes you get it where it's like, oh, now spell X also does this. Rather than, let's entirely modify spell X and change it. Same effects, everything's the same, but replace it and change it so it adds that flavor. Now it's like, oh, your fire attack now adds a damage over time effect. That's boring. It's effective, but it's boring. And that's, I think, a lot of, if you're going to do these kind of simplistic talent trees like this, or talent rows, I guess, take advantage of the fact that the changes are few and far between.